Okay, so welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Harriet Pattison is speaking at this session. She's no stranger to Learn Free, and it's really good to have her with us. So without any delay, I shall hand over. Harriet, would you like to just introduce yourself, and then
Sure.
Forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Ruth. And it's just really nice to say I've been to Learn Free for can't think how many years now, but a lot. And Juliet just reminded me that I was the keynote speaker in the last face-to-face one, which is 3-4 years ago now, which just seems amazing because it feels like about yesterday. Anyway, if we haven't met before, I'm Harriet Pattison. I'm an erstwhile home educator. We have 3 children. They didn't go to school. 2 went into the sixth form, age 16, to do A-levels, and our other daughter went to college. So, and again, that's something else that now feels a long time ago. And it was a very life-changing experience for me. I'm now a senior lecturer at Liverpool Hope University in the Department of Early Childhood, but definitely flying the flag for home education and alternative education. And that's not a place that I would be in now if it hadn't been for home education back then. And so I think part of the point is that home education changes parents, it changes our lives and our trajectories and our perspectives and who we are. I think probably almost as dramatically as it can change children's lives. And I was really excited when Juliet said to me, come and talk about this, because I thought, we don't talk about this very much, do we? We concentrate on the children, we concentrate on education, we concentrate on what's best for them and how we enable what's best for them. And the role of the parents is to do that, is to enable, to guide, to facilitate, to fight for if necessary. But it's all seen very much through the lens of the education for the child. And so I think it's really, when I started thinking about it after Juliet's suggestion, I thought, this is an important part of the truth bomb. This is an important part of home education and the narrative and the actuality of home education. So I'm going to talk about some of the ways in which I think home education changes parents, what it does to the lives of parents. Before I get started on that, though, I want to take a sort of a broader look at the position of parents in society and in politics today, because I think this makes a really important backdrop for what we do and for who we are. So I'm drawing on one of my favourite academics, Jan McVarish, from the Parent Culture Studies unit at the University of Kent. And she says that there has been a big sea change in the way that parents are viewed in society and in politics. And she kind of places the pivotal point of that sea change as being the New Labour White Paper Supporting Families, which came out in 1998 at the beginning of the New Labour tenure. And she says that did a couple of really important and dramatic things in changing the way that parents are perceived in politics and in society. And the first of those is obviously it put parents on the political map, on the political agenda, not just poor parents or parents that have particular needs or parents in particularly extraneous circumstances, but all parents have become a political issue. And it was begun then in the days of New Labour, but it's been handed on, and it's now parents are a political issue for all the political parties in this country. We are on the political agenda. Part of the argument for putting parents on the political agenda is a rhetoric surrounding what it means to be a parent. And the discourse there is really important because the idea of being a parent has morphed into parenting. So being a parent is a relationship. It's a relationship that you have with your child. Parenting, and we talk more and more and more about this word parenting, don't we, refers to the activities, the tasks, the things that parents do, the things that they need to do. And that's become more and more the focus of politics. The political angle on parenting has been about what are the things that parents do, what are the things that parents ought to be doing? What are the consequences or the lack of consequences of the things that parents do or don't do? And alongside that, there's been a kind of a shift in how we see the way that parents and children interconnect. So the argument runs that being a parent in the late 1990s, the 2000s, right up to the present day, is very different to being a parent prior to that. And the argument of New Labour at the time was, look, you know, if you grew up in the 1960s and 1970s and you have a child now in the late 1990s, 2000s, you can't just look back at, you know, what happened when you were little, what your mum and dad did, use your common sense, make the loving decisions that feel to be right at the moment, because the world has changed too much. You only have to watch Call the Midwife, don't you, to see that the 1960s is a very, very different place to the 2000s. And so parents can't be expected to know what to do any longer. And alongside that, we've got a whole load more of scientific knowledge about child development, about critical periods, about neuroscience, about things that need to happen at particular points in children's lives. And parents don't know about that stuff. They don't know about that. They need professional input. They need experts to say to them, right, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. And parenting gets politically portrayed as something that's very difficult. It's very complicated. It requires specialist knowledge. It's hard work. I always remember David Cameron talking about parenting classes and saying, look, we all need to go to these. Nobody can be an effective parent unless they go to parenting classes. It's the hardest job that you'll ever do. And that's the kind of language that being a parent is described in. It's a job, and it's a difficult, complicated job. It's hard work, and we all need help. We should all expect help. When we get that help, the job of the parent becomes, well, do what the professional tells you to do. Follow the professional advice. You know, make sure that you're doing the things that, you know, that the health visitor or the social worker or the teacher tells you to do. So in terms of education, it's not a parent's job to take on education. It's their job to support the professionals who understand education, who understand child development and child learning and know what children need. And it's parents' job to make sure that they put their child in that place where they can receive those services. So get them to school on time, make sure they're wearing the right clothes, make sure they've got the right kit with them, make sure they get their homework done, make sure that you inculcate in children the right attitudes that are going to allow them to make the most of that. So it's a very narrow, that political role for parents, those parenting tasks, consists mainly of very narrow support for professional services. And whether you're a good parent or a bad parent is going to be judged on how well you carry out those support tasks. Being a home educator kind of flies in the face of all that sort of, you know, more or less 25 years of build-up of common sense around that view of what it means to be a parent and what children need. Being a home educator really flies in the face of that, and it gets seen as being either really foolish or really misguided, but whichever one of those it is, it's also seen as an enormous risk. Why would you take that chance? You know, why would you take your child's development, learning, education, socialization? Why would you take that out of the hands of experts when you are just a parent who can't be expected to know how to do it? And I think when we put that, I think when we consider that political, social background, it becomes a bit easier to put ourselves as home educators into the kind of perspective, the kind of position that that sort of rhetoric puts us into, the kind of people that we look like from the outside. And to a certain extent, I think, feel like as well from the inside, because, you know, that's the rhetoric that bombards us as parents. So to step outside that is an enormous step. It's a huge thing to do. And from the outside, as well as from the inside, you know, there are particular issues, questions that go alongside that. Neumann and Avinam, in their research on home educators, say it's a paradigmatic change in lifestyle. the whole of the parameters of your life are going to change, and everything you do within those parameters is likely to change as well. And there's some really obvious ones that we start with. First of all, work, because home education almost inevitably means that somebody has to give up their job or their career or the possibility of a job or a career. And if they don't have to give it up in its entirety, maybe they can do part-time work or juggle with shifts or find a different way to work from home. But there are almost inevitably going to be changes around that. And that itself has knock-on effects. For a start, loss of income. Very often, families find that there is an enormous loss of income when they start home education. And some of the nice things that they did before, maybe going on holiday, children's activities, going out, those things maybe need to be curtailed. Other people have to make much more fundamental lifestyle changes, give up the car, for example. Some families I've spoken to, they've actually moved house, go and live somewhere a little bit cheaper, cut down their overheads. And many, many families, I think, if not the vast majority, have to develop a new attitude towards their income, much more of a kind of not that we can go out and spend money in the way that we could before. We kind of need to be more resourceful. We need a more of a make, do, amend mentality. We need to be thinking all the time about how we can cut costs and how we can do things for ourselves that we might have outsourced or brought in a previous life. There's likely to be changes in family arrangements. Who looks after children, who does the jobs, transportation, how we share things out within the household. That can be a major difference in the way that the family operates. One of the things that I have to say that I found when we started home educating was identity. I found that there were substantial changes to my own identity and the way that I felt about myself. And when I was with other home educators, I was fine because I knew that everybody understood what it was like and what I was doing and why I was doing it and the depth that home educating entails. But when you step outside that, the ones I used to dread the most were my husband's work dues, and people would say to me, what do you do? And I'd just be so on the back foot trying to answer that question. So feel that I can't say I'm a home educator because it just opens up such a big can of worms. So I'd end up saying, oh, well, I'm just at home with the children, or, well, I'm just a housewife at the moment, or I'm, sort of between jobs, or, that kind of sort of evasive answer that didn't really make me feel very good about myself. I know that other people, and I've heard other people be much more adept in explaining what they do as a home educator to others, but that was the one that I think I found particularly difficult. Another thing that needs adjusting is time, particularly parents' time for themselves. So we tend to think it's become really clear over the last few years and over COVID that school, the practical application of school for a lot of people is childminding. It's somewhere where the children go that enables parents to work. And that's not just school now, that's right down to the latest childcare offers for 1 and 2 year olds, that the best place for children is to be in professional care, enabling their parents to go out to work. So when you're home educating, that kind of idea, obviously the idea that you could go out to work and earn money, but also the idea that there may also be a little space of time in there for you to do domestic things or even to have some time for yourself. That kind of goes. Home education is a 24/7 job. And even when the children are in bed, the image of home educators is, well, you're going to be sitting up, going over the day's learning, seeing what's been achieved in that day, getting your material or your activities ready for the next day, maybe, even marking work. So that time is going to be sewn up as well, with the result that home educating parents have no time for themselves. They are on the job all the time. And those kind of lifestyle changes, they're very often presented to us as being sacrifices. These are the things that parents sacrifice. They sacrifice their career, their income, their identity, their free time, their space to be themselves. And of course, always, as well as talked about earlier, this enormous burden of responsibility that comes with home education, this idea that, you know, well, you're going out on a limb here because, you know, you're taking on a professional role. If you're not a professional, how are you going to manage that, and what are the consequences of that going to be? And I know there are parents, I remember one mum telling me, you know, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes and I can't get back to sleep. I just overwhelmed by the enormity of what we're doing. So there's a real weight of responsibility there. So it's all sounding a bit grim. It's not sounding very much like an advert for becoming a home educator. And I think, you know, and as I say, there is at least a grain of truth in all of those points. They are all things I think that home educators have to think about and have to confront at some time or another in their own lives. But I think the truth bomb part of this is that that is a very partial picture. It's the picture that fits really easily into that political background of, you know, parents not actually being very capable people, people who need to be propped up by professionals and by professional advice. It fits very nicely into that picture that, you know, there are all these sacrifices, these difficult things to be made, and the kind of the loss of your own autonomy, your own identity in your own life as a home educating parent. But as I say, that's a very partial view. And the truth bomb that I kind of want to drop now is looking at the other side of what it means to be a home educating parent. And I think it's important, you know, we're talking about the politics of this here. I think it is important that we make positive steps to turn that narrative around, to say, no, actually, that's not what it's like. There is a whole other facet to this, and it's a really important facet. So one of the big changes that comes about when children begin home educating or families begin home education is that parents very often share in that enormous sense of relief of taking that step. And obviously that is particularly true for children who come out of school because they have had awful, traumatic, miserable, exhausting, debilitating experiences in school. And I think the thing is, when you take the parental perspective, those things, sure, of course they happen to children, but parents experience those same things alongside children. I think it's one of the most desperate situations for any parent to be in, to have a child who is that traumatized, that unhappy, you know, trying to make things work, and watching your child go through that is a terrible thing for any parent to have to live through. And so that decision that we're not going to do this anymore, that we're changing this, comes as an enormous relief for parents too, and parents alongside their children can start healing, can start putting that behind them, can start looking forward to the next phase of their life. And that is a tremendously liberating thing to do, and obviously a really positive thing to do for people's mental well-being and their emotional health. That's kind of the most dramatic way in which people begin home educating. But I've talked to lots of other parents too who haven't, you know, fortunately haven't got to that crisis point in their families. But nevertheless, you know, we were toying with this idea and thinking about it, and, you know, and researching it and wondering about it and questioning about whether it was the right thing to do for our child and our family. And when we made that decision, it was just that same sense of relief, that same sense of thinking, right, we're here now, you know, and we're ready for the next phase of our life. So there was a big feeling of positivity and of happiness as people go into home education. And I think as time goes on, that feeling, those feelings those feelings of decision making and strength and being able to take charge of a situation, parents grow their confidence through that. And it very often shows at the beginning of home education. When I did research with Alan Thomas, one of the interesting things that we found out in our joint research was that parents moving into home education, particularly when children have been in school, is that they try in some way, to some extent, to emulate life in school. You know, they've got their touchstones about, we need to do some maths, we need to do some English, this is when we're going to do such and such, you know, this is how we're going to check that, you know, you're learning. Those kind of sort of touchstones of school that tell us that, yes, education is happening. And that as time went on, parents more and more reported, well, you know, we didn't feel we needed to do that anymore, or we wanted to kind of do that, but we didn't want to do it in that way. We started to develop our own ways of doing it, started to get our own ideas about how this ought to work. And that's part of a growing confidence of taking charge of education, of being able to make the right decisions in the moment for your child, for your circumstances. Parents are also really good at informing themselves. They're moving. You know, we talked earlier about that very narrow role that's prescribed for parents of, you know, you need to do what the professionals need you to do to support the professionals' work. That's not a decision-making role. That's a very narrow, disempowering role for parents. And it's the opposite, to come out and to think, you know, well, actually, yeah, sure, I've got responsibility for a really big thing here, but I also have the power to make decisions. I also am able to take charge of this. I'm also able to decide what is best for my child and for my family on my terms. I don't have to try and fit in with ideas that are awkward or don't suit me, or that I don't feel that I can really get behind, but that I've got to act as if I am behind. So huge leap forward in confidence. And very often we found that it wasn't just in terms of education. Parents kind of grew as people themselves and felt, you know, actually, well, if I can take on education, you know, what about all the other things that I'm maybe not particularly happy about in this world? You know, what about other things that I have a view on? And there's a whole range of things there, you know, from sort of climate change action to home births to local community projects, to all sorts of things that parents find important and suddenly found themselves empowered. Actually, you know, I am a person with a voice. I am a person with wherewithal. I can take things on. I can make differences, and feeling that, you know, wanting to get involved with those things. And questioning as well. Parents who sometimes say, you know, I'd kind of been going with the flow. And it was only when I got to this home education point that I thought, you know, actually, I don't need to do that. I don't need to go with the flow. I can look around me and I can ask questions about why we do things the way that we do. And I can get involved in finding alternative ways forward. So activism, advocacy, research, they were all things that we seen growing out of home education. And at this point, you know, I think of myself and I think of the sort of the career trajectory that kind of evolved for myself out of home education. Lots of other parents I know that got involved in research or writing or blogging or running support groups, or, you know, the fantastic example of Juliet putting on this conference and bringing us all together year after year, you know, really massive things that parents who maybe wouldn't have dreamt that they could do that before suddenly find themselves really involved in and really able to do. One of the other things that's really interesting that we found happen to parents is educational opportunities. So quite a lot of parents have said things like, you know, once we started home educating, it became not just my child's education, but it became my education as well. And I found that stuff that went over my head in school, you know, I don't know, maybe the maths lessons that I sat through, you know, bored stiff, not understanding anything and not able to pass an exam or have any confidence in at the end of the day. You know, I'm going back to those things now, and actually they're making better sense now. And I can see that, you know, you don't need to do this through a worksheet or through a book, you know, that there are other more interesting, exciting ways of doing this. And I'm doing it alongside my child, and I'm thinking, wow, you know, I wish I had known this 30 years earlier. I actually quite like this stuff. So there's quite a lot of parents thinking about education and revisiting their own education and seeing that as a real positive. And of course, learning about your child's learning about your own learning the difference in learning, which is a huge thing. If you've come through the school system and you've got children going through the school system, it is so easy to feel like, well, this is it. This is what learning looks like. This is what we have to do if we want to learn something. And we know that we have enormous problems in communicating that to the world outside home education, huge problems in communicating that. But it's also something that's really empowering for home educating parents to be finding out for themselves and enacting for themselves. Another aspect of this that I think is really interesting is the time element. And I did a piece of research sort of post-COVID, asking, it wasn't with home educating parents, it was just with a sample of parents who had during COVID, during the school closures, had taken on education in the home, usually stuff that's sent home from school, and how they had found that. And it was really interesting, because a lot of the things that parents said kind of mirrored what parents new to home education often say, that those ideas of, well, the school has sent this stuff, and so we have to do it, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how resistant the children are, we have to find a way to get through this, right the way through to, well, actually, I can see that there are other ways to learn this, and if I had to do that stuff, I'd be pretty bored too. So I'm starting to feel really bad, getting an insight into their education and thinking, actually, that's, that doesn't really look very inspiring or very much fun. One of the big interesting shifts that parents talked about then was this issue of time and what happens to time. And parents, when you said to parents, what were the difficulties in doing this, very often time came up as an issue, and saying, well, I'm trying to work from home, and then I've got the children's schoolwork, and I've got to oversee that, and I've got to do everything else that I always do, entailed with, keeping the family together and running the home and so on, and I am just constantly under time pressure and constantly out of time. And then when you said to them, obviously notwithstanding that COVID was an awful situation that caused an awful lot of suffering for a lot of people, but notwithstanding that, is there anything positive that has come out of this experience? And they said, yeah, it's time. We had time as a family. We had time with our children. So it seems like time was the difficult thing, time was the hard thing, but time was also the thing that you gained. And it seemed to me that there was a shift in perspective about what time means. Time, that pressurized kind of time where we're thinking, I have an hour to do this, I have an hour to do that, it's all measured and chopped up through the day. And when people could move into a more relaxed state, time stopped being that. Time starts to be a pool of possibilities. People stop talking about when, we wasted 10 minutes waiting for this, or 15 minutes before that happened. And that part of time becomes, yeah, we had a nice conversation then, we played a game, we talked about such and such, we remembered so and so, we did this or that together, and it seems that time transfers into a kind of a pool of possibilities rather than something that we're really tightly measuring. And I think that's another, that chance to alter perspectives, to think about life differently, to think about your position in life differently, is also an enormous gain for home educating parents. So time, learning, life, your identity, all of those really sort of fundamental questions, home education gives us the chance to rethink those, and to go forward with new possibilities for those important things. And another thing that came on, I suppose I've partly touched on this as well, talking about education and talking about relationships with the family, is that sometimes parents start doing things, sometimes through their children, but sometimes through the opportunities of a home educating life, that they might never have thought of doing before. And I think partly that comes through the change of lifestyle, and the loss in income. Because people start thinking, getting really resourceful and thinking, if we want that, we're going to have to do it for ourselves. If we want, I don't know, a barbecue in the garden, we're going to go out and build that for ourselves. If we want to go on holiday, we're going to have to go camping in a field, rather than, going and staying in a hotel and having a package and that kind of thing. So people become a lot more resourceful. They become a lot more that kind of make, do, amend mentality. It's a bit more than make, do, amend. It's more a creative opportunity for parents to rethink, or families to rethink how they're going to go about those things. And that's really interesting. And I've met incredible people who've just done mind-blowing things. So for example, pre-COVID, I went to a home education festival in Germany, which is really interesting in itself, because home education is not officially allowed in Germany. And there was this huge, wonderful festival there with 1,000 people came to that festival, and it was wonderful. And amongst the many people that I met there, I met a lady from Scotland, and she'd come with her son. and we were just chatting about how they'd got there, and she said, we cycled. They had cycled from Scotland to just outside Berlin to go to this festival, and just it was just such a fantastic thing to hear. And I just thought, yeah, that is such a great thing to do. So, we'd never have done it. Her son had come out of school really traumatized. So we would never, ever have dreamt that we could do something like that. But here we are on our bicycles at this festival. So it was great to hear about that. And another really interesting way that this happens is parents get caught up in things that their children do in their children's interests, and sometimes, breaking out of their own comfort zone to really do that. Things like, I can remember, our son really being into Pokemon and, wanting to go on the Xbox and the PlayStation and things that held no interest at all for me, but thinking, right, he's interested in it. So there has to be some interest in it. And I've got to find out what that interest is. And parents end up doing all sorts of things that their children have said, I want to have a go at that, or I find this really fascinating, and parents are rolling up their sleeves and saying, okay, well, I'll come and do that with you then. I'll come and find out what that's about too. And sometimes that's a really enlightening process for parents, breaking out of their comfort zone and finding new outlets for themselves. So I'll wind up now, and hopefully there's quite a lot in there that we can talk about and people's personal experiences. I want to go back to the truth bomb side of this. We have this view of children as being very vulnerable. This is a social political view of children as being very vulnerable, of being at risk, of being very needy, of needing particular professional inputs at particular times, and if they don't get those, the effects of those are consequences of not getting that right treatment at the right time is long lasting and very impactful, and their whole personality, their whole future trajectory, their whole life possibilities will be altered by that. And we have this vision of parents as being not very capable people who need to be overseen, who shouldn't really be making big decisions on behalf of their children, but need to go to parenting classes, need to be upskilled, need to know what the right ways of going about parenting are, need to be told that by professionals and by other people. And I think part of our truth bomb today is to fight back on both of those fronts and to say, no, actually, parents are more than capable. They're resourceful, they're creative, they're imaginative, they're problem solving, they're inspirational, and they are more than capable of looking after children who are resilient, intelligent, adaptive themselves, and going forward in education together. And I think that's a really big element in our truth bomb, is to change that narrative. So I'll stop talking now. Suffice to say that I hope my email address is out on the website. I need to check with Juliet, but if anybody ever wants to get in touch with me outside Learn Free and talk about this or the reading research or any of the other research that I've done, or they've got questions, or they just want to have a chat, I am only in contact. I'm only still in the home educating loop by virtue of people doing that and talking to me. So I always really, really welcome it and keeping in touch. So do feel absolutely free to do that anytime at all. So I think we do have some. Yeah, so we don't have any questions or anything like that in the chat yet.
At the moment, but I think if there's things that you want to just pick up on what Harriet said. I know there's two things that have really struck me, Harriet, just to kick it off. One is just, I don't think you've put it so succinctly, the way that our parenting might has been just stripped away really by political narrative. And although I'm aware of it, I mean, I've been home educating for 20 years nearly. I've never quite heard it so forcefully as you've just presented it there, and I think that's just really something that's we need to really grab hold of that truth bomb. Yes. Really kind of say, hang on a minute, let's just change that narrative. Yeah. Why are we operating under that when actually these are my children? This is And I think we do really need to claim that back, don't we? And it affects you in a lot of small decisions. You don't just have the confidence to kind of go and do things. And it's just so key to kind of, and if you're at the beginning of your home ed journey, then it really is important that you kind of grasp hold of that, because that is going to unlock the whole of your journey, isn't it? And a load of freedom for your family and for your children. So that was the first thing that really, I mean, if anybody wants to ask any questions, then please, I think we have got one that we'll come back to. But just the second thing really for me is, I just wanted to say, you were just saying about how we get very resourceful, and we actually are very good at creating, doing things maybe because needs must. But I've just, I'm very aware that when I ask my children what the highlights are going back, the things they remember are very often the simple things that maybe we did because we thought we can't do anything else because we can't afford it, or because, but actually those are the very things that they remember the most fondly. And I think that's something that I've kind of had to rethink, that, when we say we'll just do a picnic, I might be thinking because that's the cheapest way of doing it. But I think for the children, there's something that's just very natural, and they actually love that. And sometimes they're the things that they enjoy more than the things that you scrimp and save and say, well, we'll do this. And a classic example, we did a family holiday to America a few years ago. We saved up for it for a long time. We've got family over there that facilitated it. But when, we were kind of saving up for them to go to Disney, and when we got there and we said to them, right, do you want to go? They all said no, because we'd been and stayed in a shack in the mountains in Colorado. We'd made our own fishing rods out of a paper clip and a stick and whatever.
Wow.
And those were the things that they enjoyed. And they didn't want to go to Disney then because it was too false and manufactured. It wasn't what they wanted to do at the time. And, all these things you just think, oh, and it would have cost us I think it was about £500 because we're a large family, there's 9 of us. And so we were just like, fine, we'll cross that one off the list, no problem. But it was eye-opening for me, because you tend to presume that, that they'll want to do the things that are going to cost, but actually the things they value are very often the simple things.
Yeah, I think it's part of the narrative, Ruth. I think it's part of the narrative that the right place for children to be is in daycare or in school, enabling parents to go out to work because children need, iPads, expensive after school activities, trips to Disney, that these are all sort of what's valuable, what parents contribute to childhood, rather than what parents contribute to childhood is that they're there. They're doing things, being with their children, doing things as a family, getting interested in what they're interested in, having fun together. Those are the things that are really important about being a parent. But I do think that, along with the other narrative about how we're not very capable and we're not very competent, we get sold like, your job is to go and earn money. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's very good. Okay, we have got a question. Ogechi said, outcomes for children, what are the statistics? Do you have some statistics about outcomes? I presume that's for home ed, perhaps as distinct from those in the education system. Do you have any kind of stats or anything, or anywhere?
Do we have statistics? We don't have statistics as such. We do know quite a lot about outcomes for home educated children, but we don't have, because there is no national statistic gathering, and because it's a very complicated area. It's a very complicated area. Even if we had the wherewithal, it's not entirely clear what statistics we would be gathering. Some children are home educated from the outset. We would not, we couldn't put those children in the same bracket of statistics as children who have come out of school at particular points in their education journey in order to be home educated, because supposing that happens at, a transition to secondary school, what then do we attribute to home education, and what then do we attribute to school education? So I think it's very difficult, this idea that we can have sort of clean-cut outcomes. The other big question there that I think for home educators is, do we want comparable outcomes with schools? Measure very particular things at very particular times, and it's fraught with difficulty to transfer that to home education and to say, you know, well, yes, okay, well, let's look at how many GCSEs, for example, home educated children get on average, because the way in which home educated children, the opportunities for home educated children are very different to those for children in school. And even when I did, you know, I did a large piece of research on reading, on how home educated children learn to read. And one of the really interesting things that came out of it was that a lot of home educated children learn to read late or much later than children in school. So it's quite normal for a home educated child to begin reading at 10 or 11 or 12 or 13. You know, if you tested that child on a reading test at 8, they're going to fail it. They're not reading. But by the time they're 11, they might be reading far in advance of what would be expected of a child in school at 11. So it's a really complicated picture. And I think the problem with getting statistics together is that then the statistics will become more important than the really complicated situation, the really complicated thing that we're looking at. And I would hate that to happen. I would hate that to happen, because then I think, you know, one easy number will override, oh, look, you know, this child is 10 and they're not reading, and therefore they need to go into school and onto a phonics program and this and that and the next thing, when that is very far from the truth.
Yeah, it's the same thing, isn't it? Anytime you try and standardize anything, every child is unique. You know, I mean, who's the standard child?
Yeah.
I mean, I've got 7, and you know, none of them are standard.
Yes.
And
yes.
every time you think you've got it cracked, oh, we'll learn in this particular way, or you know, you find a new way of doing it. Well, every child just breaks the mold again, don't they?
Yes.
Even with family, you can see that. So you know, you replicate that across the whole system, and there's, you know, most people are going to fall outside of any standards, aren't you, that you set, because it's just such a broad thing.
Absolutely.
Thing, isn't it, that we're great and that we're free to follow.
Yeah. And I think, you know, sort of going back to parents learning about learning, I think that is one of the really important things that people continually say, whether they're big families or little families, that every child is different and that everybody's learning trajectory is different. And I think that's, you know, and which in a way it sounds obvious, but actually, you know, when you come from a standardized schooling society, you know, that's a huge thing to recognise. We're very quick in the standardised schooling society to say, you know, a child is not doing this or that by this or that age, has a problem or is in trouble. You know, and part of the truth problem for home education is,
it can actually indicate,
you know,
the opposite. You know, they learn differently. In some ways, it can be because they're actually more advanced, or they're just looking at it in a different way. That is, you know, that I mean, they can be geniuses, can't they? But they wouldn't be recognised because they don't do X at this particular date. You know,
playing to that particular strength. Yeah.
It's just important to remember all this, isn't it? That you know, it is unique to each child. Okay, right, Julia, I'm going to just bring you in because obviously there's no more questions in the chat. So if you have got any questions, either put your hand up or just put them in the chat quickly before we finish. But Julia, do you just want to say a little word about the chat, the community on Facebook, because obviously these conversations can continue, can't they?
Well, I'll say that first, and then I'll go back to what I put my hand up. So we have a group that we started on Learn Free a couple of years ago, actually. So it's called Learn Free Community, and Ruth has put the link in the chat. And if you want to, you can go and join that group. One of us will be along to approve you. Basically we can, so I'm putting little slides up, so when Harriet has had her session, I've got a slide there with Harriet, and any conversations you want to have around Harriet's session, you can then just do under that. You know, it's just a good way to sort of have some further discourse on it. But what I was going to say, Harriet, is that I had some thoughts about, it would be really interesting if there was a way to do research on children who've learned through a sort of standard curriculum, and children who haven't, and you kind of look at them at a certain point and say, okay, what are you learning right now, and sort of find out what that child knows, and in both cases, and then sort of 6 months later find out what they both know about the subject. So your self-directed learners versus sort of and I thought, and then you could perhaps talk to them again a year later or whatever, and I thought that would actually make for some interesting research to see how about knowledge retention when that child is self-directed and actually pursuing that knowledge for themselves, as opposed to having the content poured into them by an external person, you know, the extrinsic versus the intrinsic sort of motivation. Well, it's not motivation we're talking about, but you know what I mean. So I thought that would be really interesting, but as you say, there are many other factors that could complicate that. So,
Yeah.
You know, all it takes is one real bright spark to throw it all into chaos.
That kind of question sort of came out of the reading research, to a certain extent, at least, and it's really difficult to keep a handle on it, because, you know, people would say things that, yeah, that, you know, maybe the child had started on a reading scheme at home, you know, and they'd got so far and then they didn't want to do it anymore, you know, and that had been ditched and something else had happened. And sometimes children had done a little bit of it, you know, maybe quite young. I mean, I remember one example of one little boy, and he'd started, by the time he was 3, he could recognize his own name, and, you know, and writing letters, and then he just went completely off it and didn't do any more reading again until he was, you know, 8. And then he decided that he wanted to read his comic. His mum didn't read it properly, so he wanted to read it, and he took over. Yeah. And so it's really hard to tell, well, what happened in that gap.
Yeah, children don't like to be pigeonholed.
No, they absolutely don't. They absolutely don't. And I think part of the big thing that parents learn through the home educating journey is to let go. Yeah. And again, I think, you know, it goes back to that idea of confidence and feeling empowered as a parent, you know, being confident enough to say, this is not a problem. You know, I know my son, my daughter, you know, she is 9 and she's not reading, but she is doing this and this, and that's fine. You know, and it's having the confidence. I think it's a huge thing.
I think it's also about trust, you know, that confidence and that trust. So first of all, trusting that your children will learn, because they've got all the building blocks, they've got everything built into them that's designed to learn, and trusting your instincts, and yes, you know, when to step back, and when it's right to maybe push a bit, or when it's whatever, you know, whatever the issue is, and knowing your children well enough, because that's once again in a school situation where a teacher's unlikely to know children to that extent that they can yes, tailor their approach. But that I had my one daughter, she was about 2 years old, and I was teaching her older sister with flashcards, teaching her to read. And she picked up a few things and used to get the answers right before her sister could. And one day she was standing next to a relative of ours, and he came back and he said, you know what? She just looked at that sign and she said, danger. It was danger, you know, danger. And like, obviously not a word she was used to. And I was like, what? You know, she wasn't even 3 yet. And then I kind of like didn't really worry about it. And she just totally abandoned, like it didn't progress. And it like just went dormant for years. And then eventually kind of, you know, she got reading again. But it was really like, children are funny. Children just, they defy whatever you want to put them into. You know, and I think we have to learn to be adaptable and not try and keep them in a box, give them that freedom to kind of jump in and out of their box and reshape it and put it inside out or whatever, tear it apart, you know.
I think part of that is parents having the confidence that they are the right person to make the right decision, you know, and if you think that this is right for your child, then that's what you do. And it doesn't matter what's happening in school or what the other home ed families are doing, you know, you are the right person to say, right, this is what we're going to do next. Yeah. And also, you know, parents are very adaptable. They are very creative. You know, if something is not working or it doesn't feel right, they don't just sort of, you know, stick with it regardless. Say, okay, well, let's try and do something different then. Let's go a different way, or let's put it down for a bit and have a break from it, or, you know, whatever it is. But I think it's that feeling of empowerment that I'm the best person to make the decision in this set of circumstances.
Yeah, and
comment in, I think, hasn't she? Just but heard yesterday that children in the UK are doing well on reading, but not enjoyment of reading, which is interesting when you think of longer rather than shorter term outcomes, and what the purpose and the different approach in home education and what you want as a parent. But you can definitely be hard as a parent when comparisons are being made in the shorter term.
Oh yeah, and especially if your child goes to something like Cubs or Brownies, and they sort of like, but your child, you know, well, how come they can't read? That kind of thing. It's sort of, you're made more aware of it, and that pressure comes, and it's like you've got to kind of really work on your confidence in letting whoever that person is know that you're actually okay with it, and you'd appreciate them that they keep their comments to themselves, really, and don't shame your child. I just see Ogechi has her hand up. Would you like to unmute and
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm very new to all of this. My son is still in school and I'm strongly considering homeschooling him. Harriet, thanks for speaking so passionately about this. I guess, I don't know if it's a question or a statement or a bit of both, really. One of my anxieties is, I guess, coming out of the mindset that, school is the best in terms of that, well, it will provide the best education, right? He'll come out of school with all the knowledge that he ought to have, go through the school system and be as clever as he can be, if that makes sense. And actually, if I was to step out of that, would I be making sure he's, I don't like the word clever, but do you know what I mean? Would I kind of be making sure that he's, still going to be super smart and clever and would I be able to do it? I mean, I know you just touched there a little bit about confidence, but I guess it is that comparison between, a child that goes to school and you're absolutely certain that the teachers are qualified and of course they know what they're doing because they're qualified and they can actually do this, versus, myself as a parent. And I don't know whether I can provide him this same outcome. I don't want to use that word because I know we just touched on that, Harriet. You gave such a great point on that, but do you know what I mean? Kind of sort of that typical stereotypical narrative of someone who's gone to college and then gone to university, and do you know what I mean? I've kind of gone through this structure and I don't know, does that happen for homeschooled children? Will I be able to ensure it for mine?
I think if a child comes out of school, you're making a choice about the kind of education that will suit them best, and that there are children who go through school and who absolutely thrive on it, and they have that, that kind of trajectory of going off to university and, and that kind of idealized trajectory that's sort of held up as, well, this is the gold standard. This is the best thing that can happen to a person. Whether that is the best thing that can happen to a person, in the future, maybe it is for some people, but maybe it isn't for others. So I think you do have to make a decision. I do think you have to make a bold decision about what is right to do now. Once you start home educating, the world is your oyster. It is full of possibilities. And I think if you do take that step, I think if you do make that decision, your confidence will grow, and the time that you spend with your son and the things that you do, your education will develop organically. You will see what the next stage is as the next stage comes onto the horizon, rather than looking down that narrow track and saying, this is where we're going to be in 6 months, this is where we're going to be in 6 years. And I think it does take confidence. I think it is an enormous thing to do, but also I think if you decide to do it, you will grow in that confidence. You will grow into that role and into that mindset that allows you to do that.
No, brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, well, good luck. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah,
I hope you have a great time.
Same.
I think she's got a comment on as well. She just says she went through school and got excellent qualifications, but doesn't think that she received a great education. So she thinks it's about what kind of education you want, which is just what Harriet was saying, wasn't it there? And I think just our experiences that we've had we've got one that's just about to graduate in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whenever it is, and 2 that have also qualified last year at uni, they graduated. So it is possible. You're not actually closing any doors. So just to be clear, it isn't either or. You can actually do exams. There are ways of doing that. So, but you don't have to. There are other options as well. And I think there are many, many different ways of achieving the same thing. And so, don't be put off by thinking I couldn't get there, because that was what I thought for 10 years. What would we do about exams? I wouldn't be able to take them through exams, but they've all managed it so far. But there are other routes as well. So, it isn't, and again, when they're small, you have, it's about living today, isn't it? It's about embracing where you are now. And if you make that decision, you know, you can just take it a day at a time. You don't have to make any big changes, and you can change your mind about things. You can carve out the path that works for you and your family and for your individual children. So you're not making huge decisions that are irreversible. And I think it's just worth, you know, you might feel like you need all the answers now, but that's not how it actually works, is it? Very often you make a decision at a time based on what works at the time.
And I think what I want to also say to
That's great.
is
Thank
that
you.
there are you know, hundreds, thousands of home educated kids coming out and achieving their goals, going into work or into further study. Some of them, you know, like they are doctors, they are nurses, they are teachers, they are lawyers, there are people serving in the King's Guard, even that we're home educated. We are everywhere. We're like mushrooms growing quietly overnight. But the thing is that there are many ways to get there, as Ruth was saying. And it is really, you know, about knowing your child, knowing what works for them, and helping them to achieve their goals. But we've had to do a lot of trusting, and it actually it does work out. And as Ruth says, it's not a final word. Things can change. There are many really good bloggers and speakers that you can go and watch, listen to, books to read that will reassure you. But there are so many of us now that are seeing the fruit, and it's not a journey you need to take fearfully. Honestly, it isn't. It's a good journey, and it revolutionizes your family ultimately.
Thank you so much. That's so reassuring. I like what sorry, my baby's in the background.
I can hear it. So sweet. I hear the little snuggles. So sweet.
I love what you're saying there, that there's many different ways, and you know, to still get to your outcomes and get to where you want to get to. So yes, that's definitely very reassuring. Thank you.
The other thing I'd add to that is, you know, where you want to get to. Not everybody wants to get to the same place. You know, and for some children, you know, or young people, it's right to go to university, and they are that way minded. But for others, you know, I work in a university, and sometimes it's obvious that people have got here on the sausage machine. It's not the right decision for them, but, you know, it's been the trajectory, it's been the thing that's been pushing them through the education system all the while, and they'll get a big tick from, you know, when they leave school and they've got the university place. But they probably have never had a proper consideration of what are the other possibilities for me now? You know, what are the other things that I might like to do with my life? And I think that's really sad. And I think home educators are much better, you know, as I say, you know, resourceful, creative people are much better at thinking about, you know, well, let's not worry about what the prestige or the right thing to do here is. Let's think about you and what would be good for you next.
Yeah. What suits you? Yeah. I agree. Well, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay. So I think, shall we wrap it up there? Anybody else got any burning questions that they want to ask, or shall we stop it there? That's lovely. Harriet, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure to be here. And if anybody does want to email me, you know, feel absolutely free. I'd love to hear from you. Yeah,
that's lovely.
Just on that point, Harriet, I think we don't have your email address. I've just linked to Liverpool Hope. So if you want me to add any other contact information for you to your profile, just email me and I'll add it.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
We don't tend to do email addresses. So it's like Instagram, LinkedIn, any of those.
Just put it in the chat, or
if you want to, yes, you can. That's absolutely fine.